Welcome everybody. I'm Bonnie Clearwater. I'm the director and chief curator of NSU Museum of Art of Lauderdale. And we have had quite a week here this week. I'm delighted that we are able to celebrate the opening of Café, Dolly, Picabia, Schnabel, Willumsen, with this conversation with Julian Schnabel, the only living artist in the show. You know, a really good picture. And I would like to thank a number of people who have made this possible. First of all, this is an exhibition that was organized by the J.F. Willumsen Museum in Denmark. All of you have heard of Willumsen before, right? And don't worry, neither did I. But that was the whole point of this, right? The director, Annette Johansson, is with us today, and I thank them for all the coordination on this exhibition. We also have the curators of this exhibition, two artists from Denmark who sort of put this all together and spun all the connections. Christian Lind and Klaus Karstensen.
You guys want to stand up for a second?
And if you look at this exhibition, really enormous paintings in the show, and the number of paintings in the show, and that they've come from all over the world, you can see we really need sponsors. So we were very, very fortunate to have Brickell Flatiron as the major sponsor of the exhibition. With additional early support came from Christine and Andy Hall Foundation, Sandy and Stephen Musk Foundation, and additional support from W Hotel, who have provided our accommodations. First of all, I'd also like to thank Julian's Schnabel Studio for their outstanding assistance. There were so many details in order to organize this show, and Porfirio was with us, so thank you, Porfirio, for all the coordination. And I'd also extend a special thanks to my staff who coordinated the exhibition from our end and our board for supporting me in bringing this amazing, crazy exhibition to Fort Lauderdale. It really is the first exhibition that is opening as part of my programming, and you probably are wondering whether you made the right choice now. It was actually very important for me that it's opened with this exhibition because it really does lay out so many of the issues that I find fascinating in art. Going right down to what is art and aesthetics and taste and style, what does it all mean that it's happening at a certain time and now. And I think it's a happy coincidence that our exhibition coincides with the Zero Group exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. Zero consisted of a group of European artists after World War II who aimed to create a new international art in the international language of abstraction. And it's important to point out that even when art doesn't seem to be political, it is. The Zero Group and other post-war art museums rejected the figurative work that was extolled by Germany during the war for its association with the Nazi regime. In the early 1940s in America, Mark Rothko and Barnett Newman fiercely rejected this type of figurative art as was represented by Thomas Hart Benton and Grant Wood, as they contended that this kind of painting, this regionalism kind of painting, led to nationalism, which they identified as the cause of the crisis in Europe with the rise of Hitler. And now, again, Hitler attacked modern art as degenerate and declared artists such as Francis Picabia, who started his career as one of the first abstract painters, and then later on was a part of the radical art movement, Dada, along with Marcel Duchamp. The Nazis, the degenerate art show, dedicated an entire section to Dada. So what did Hitler extol? Sentimental, kitschy, classical figurative art. As a result, subsequent figurative painting was burdened with this negative connotation after the war. Add to this that the Soviet Union adopted social realism as the state-sanctioned art. You can see how painting figuratively after the war was seen as regressive and nationalistic act. Now, switch to America, post-war art in the U.S. also had to contend with the strict rules of modern art that were promoted by the enormously influential critic Clement Greenberg. It's so hard to understand today the grip that Greenberg had on the art world. Modern art, according to the Greenberg doctrine, was tied to the concept of progress, a very modern 20th century idea. This meant that art needed to move toward the purity of the medium, eliminating anything that was not inherent to painting, which meant pure pigment on the flat surface of picture plate. The figure, illusionism, narrative, even emotion had to be purged from the painting according to these rules. Ultimately, this led to an endgame and to the declaration that painting was dead. American artists of Julian Schnabel's generation realized during their formative period in the, well, you probably a very early formative period, the rules of modern art were arbitrary and that art contained a variety of directions. They also had first-hand knowledge about art happening in Europe. Their generation and the generation before, who rejected the grip of the international art of abstraction as another form of authoritarianism. Those of you who saw the Sigmar Polka show in MoMA this year know that that was one of the subjects of it. And the same thing with Gerhard Richter, George Baselitz. All of these artists opened up the possibilities for painting to be at once abstract and figurative. Now, I was a student when Julian's first plate painting was shown at Mary Boom's small-sized gallery in Soho in 1979. And it's important to realize the scale of the gallery because I can still feel physically what it was like to see those plate paintings for the first time. It was such a visceral, physical response, and it gave me this amazing jolt. It was a new beginning, without a doubt. He was held and attacked at the same time, still is, for being regressive and an apostate to the rules of modern art. The thing is, art has never been the same since then. And yes, he is a great filmmaker, starting with his debut film, Basquiat, but that's only part of his creative outlet. Unfortunately, it's become fashionable for people to say they like his films better than his paintings. Now, I've worked with Julian on a number of exhibitions and book projects over the years, and I find him infinitely fascinating. When he mentioned 2 years ago that he was going to be in a show with Picabia, I was immediately intrigued when I discovered it was with this obscure Danish artist from the late 19th and early 20th century, Willumsen. I was hooked. Looking at these paintings, I find myself constantly asking why. Why did each choose the paintings they did? How did they choose their subjects? And why did they work counter to the trends of the art world of their time, risking facing certain rejection? From these questions, I feel I'm just beginning to grasp the full impact of each artist's enterprise. I'd like to extend my very deep appreciation to Julian for his extraordinary participation in this exhibition and his true generosity with his time and dedication. Earlier this week, he spent an entire day conducting a master artist workshop with artists at our Automation Academy of Art and Design, giving close to 40 artists the experience of a lifetime. through the years, he's become a touchstone for me in my own journey of art. I'm glad we had this opportunity to work together on such a monumental project. So, I think we've touched on everything we wanted to talk about, but I want to thank you for this wonderful exhibition, for joining us today. It's been an amazing year for you. You've had shows all over the world, most of them I've seen this year. The show in New York, that was at Larry Gagosian's gallery, was focused mostly on your paintings from the late 1980s, most of which were quote-unquote abstract. New York Times art from the late 1980s. New York Times art critic Roberta Smith hailed the exhibition and said it was time for a major U.S. exhibition to go to tour in a museum. And it's fascinating to see, I've seen that show at Gagosian with mostly what was considered abstract paintings. And in conjunction with this show, which is mostly what would be considered figurative. How do you reconcile these two modes in your work?
Well, I think that when you think of post-war American painting, you think of Bakunin, you think of Franz Klein, and all of the artists that come to mind as abstract expressionist artists. There was an impulse to leave historical baggage of Europe. Can we turn my mic down a little bit? There was an impulse to leave their historical baggage behind, and with the hope of inventing a new kind of art. To be free of things that, so that being said, in the trajectory of contemporary modern art in the United States, people worked with that. There was a notion of an irreducible image. Someone, if you think of, say, Pollock, you see the drips on these paintings, well, that's his signature. Or if you think of Rothko, there's some fuzzy shape, and the edges are kind of fuzzy, and there's two colors that are, or three. But essentially, coming up to the edge of the rectangle, and he found his irreducible image in that. I didn't find that for myself, one thing that represented what I was. And when I was in art school in Houston, I found it extremely frustrating looking at pictures of old master paintings in books, and I must be, I don't think it's particularly helpful, actually, for kids in school. They want to think about something that's pertinent to them that they can use, and they look at these old paintings thinking, well, that doesn't have anything to do with my life. But if you go to Europe, and if you go to Italy, and if you stand in front of a Caravaggio painting, or if you go to the Giotto Chapel in Padua, or you go to Arezzo and see the Piero della Francesca paintings, or if you go to the Prado and see Velázquez and Goya, you realize that those paintings are really modern, and it's the way that they're painted that makes them so. And if you look at the sky when you're in Madrid, it's as if Goya just claimed the sky for himself. So, as and then when I showed up in New York, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I moved to Texas when I was 15 years old with my parents in Brownsville, Texas. I lived on the Mexican border. When I came back to New York in 1973, Bryce Martin was showing, and there was a lot of work that I remember driving. Richard Serra gave me a ride in his station wagon to Bryce Martin's show at Biker Gallery in 1974. And I was just a kid, and I met him at Max's Kansas City. We were drinking there, and he said he was going to go he said, well, what kind of paintings do you paint? And I said, well, I make paintings of projected drawing tests. Like draw yourself when you're 30, when you're 40, when you're 50. And he looked at me and said, you know, I only like Bryce Martin's paintings and Ellsworth Kelly's paintings. I thought, okay, he's giving me a riot kind of anyway. I thought if Bryce was painting the last paintings, and he had covered everything up with wax and gray, that it was a good time to reintroduce language into painting, reintroduce imagery, reintroduce Christ on the cross into painting again. And so I started out with this concept of, you know, what is painting from A to Z, and I'm going to address all of these different aspects of what I thought painting was. And I wasn't really, you know, I really disliked, I mean, when I was a kid, I was attracted to Richard Newman's paintings and also to some other figurative painters, but even somebody like Francis Bacon, who I think is a great painter and made a lot of paintings I'm not crazy about, but made some really great ones that I am. There was a manneristic way that they had of drawing a figure where you could say, oh yeah, that's a Bacon because the figure's drawn like that, or that's a Lester Johnson, figure's drawn like that, or that's a Richard Lindner, with some kind of brown shades and Willumsen. And I thought, well, I don't want to do that. And so first I started looking at, you know, and I thought Vito Acconci was very, very interesting art. I started looking into things that Clement Greenberg had said were obsolete or not pertaining to modern art, or modern painting, because they seemed to be superfluous to what the essence of the materials were and what formal painting was about. So I made paintings and projected drawing tests, draw yourself when you're 30, when you're 40, or draw a family, where you'd have somebody who drew a dead dog in the middle of the yard, mother reading, father reading the paper, and then somebody saw this piece of paper, they'd keep them in a psychiatric ward for another couple of years. I thought that those were interesting because those things actually had real effect on people's lives. And I started to think about the notion of commandeering prior meanings of things for another set of meanings. So it was a sense of use. And I think ultimately when I made the first plate paintings, I was also thinking about, I wanted to make a painting that I hadn't seen before. And so I thought, well, actually I was in Barcelona, and I was staying in this crummy hotel on the Ramblas, $2.50 a night. And there was a beautiful armoire, there was a beautiful closet in that room. It was just human scale. It was about 9 feet tall, the ceiling was 9 feet tall, so the closet kind of jutted out from the room, and it was 8 feet tall and about 9 feet wide. And it kind of came out at a point that was maybe 4 feet, and went back to the wall. So I thought, I went to Park Well, and I saw these ceramics that were all around the park, and a very decorative manner, and I thought, and they were actually embedded in dirt. And later I went to this very bad restaurant, and it had a terrible mosaic that was white. And I thought, you know, when I came home, I thought if I could get some white plates and glue them onto that closet, that would be a good surface, would be a good pattern of meaning. I could look at that like it's a blank canvas and try to reintroduce language into that, or painting into that. I didn't know how much painting was supposed to go into it. If I hadn't seen Matisse's Chapel in Vence at that time in my life, and probably if I would have seen it, I wouldn't have made the first plate painting, because the way he painted the Stations of the Cross, he actually had white tiles and he drew with black on top of these white tiles in a very diagrammatic way. And I probably thought, well, he already did that, so I'm not going to do that. But then I made the first plate painting in the summer of 1978. So my birthday was in October, so I was 26 years old when I made that painting. And the first painting was called The Patients and the Doctors. And it's interesting to think of now, there's a show that was in Paris recently at the Musée d'Orsay called Man Suicide by Society. The article came from an essay by Artaud called The Artist Suicide by Society. It was about Van Gogh. And what's his name? I'll think of his name in a minute, but he had a gallery in Paris, and he asked Artaud to write catalog text for the show about Van Gogh's last paintings, which he did. And he wrote about madness, and his notion of madness was very, very different than Van Gogh's relationship to madness, because Artaud looked for the dark side of things, and he explored the macabre, and he explored drugs and shamanism and things like that. And Van Gogh was just seeing everything in yellow and in bright colors, and he just saw the beauty in things and painted it best he could, and he couldn't understand why people didn't see what he was seeing. And it drove him crazy. And he felt more and more isolated. But his intention and his relationship to madness was absolutely, had nothing to do with what Artaud thought. But the essay that Artaud wrote was so interesting anyway, and it just showed that after Van Gogh is dead, Artaud writes this article. They're both dead now. The show takes place in 2014. And so you've got these two people lying together historically in a way, but when you read the text and you look at the paintings, they don't really have that much to do with each other, except Artaud's drawings are great also. So what I'm saying is art is incongruous to life. And J.F. Willumsen, I don't really know that much about him. But I imagine, I think he had a rich wife. And so he didn't have to succumb to some of the normal situations that many people do. And he had independence, and he painted what he wanted to paint. And I was having this show in Germany, and Klaus, and that they all came to the show. I was having a gallery and suggested I could be in the show with Willumsen and Francis Picabia, who's what I know. And they showed me an image of a painting that was painted in 1898 called The Marriage of the King's Son. And in 1948, Willumsen repainted it and added these two figures in the middle that kind of looked like they stepped out of a Disney movie. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Time has always been something that I thought was very, very difficult to comprehend and worth thinking about. So there's one painting that's in this show. It's not the same one that was in the show in Denmark, but I found some wallpaper before wallpaper from 1850. He printed it on polyester and superimposed a goat with a rabbit on his head that I had in the studio for some years. Mike Kelly committed suicide. We weren't good friends, but I knew him, and he liked stuffed animals, and I thought, oh, I'd like to make a painting for him. So I put the goat with the rabbit on his head in the wallpaper, and then put some purple ink on the polyester and washed it with a hose to make these purple cloud-like forms. Interesting to see that painting that was started in 1850 by somebody and finished in 2012 or 13 by me, and Willumsen starting this painting in 1898 and finishing it in 1948. And if people have enough time to look at something, invariably don't change it or find some other reincarnation of themselves.
Talking about time, it seems to me that in order for people, and when they look at a work, even if it's from the past, it's not present. Is this how you approach the work? I mean, there's always this connection with the past, and you're seeing it today.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is absolutely true. Art brings you into its present. You see a Caravaggio painting today, it brings you into its present. You're seeing it for the first time, or if you saw the Victoria's Secret film of the bicycle thief today, they made it after the Second World War. It's the first time you see it. Even the second time you see it, or whenever you see it, you've seen it 5 times. You're different each time you see it. And painting absolutely brings you into its present. So those men may not be alive right now, but their work certainly is. And the work is questioning you, and you have to come out to greet it. It either fills you up or it doesn't. Yeah, and there were 3 other paintings I was working on, and that painting drove me crazy. It didn't fit with the other ones, and it was just hard to look at. So I took the painting, and I forgot that I made it. And Porfirio was actually going through the warehouse, or saw the edge of something, and he opened this thing about 5 years ago. And he said, what about this? And so we stretched it and looked at it, and I decided I liked it. And so I made the painting 25 years ago. It's hanging on the walls the first time I've shown it. That's a good thing. That's a thing that you can do with painting. If you're making a movie and you say to people you're making a movie with, we'll show it in 25 years, they might get a little pissed. But if you're paying for it and making the work yourself and you just put it away and you're not ready to look at it yet, that's one of the things that you can actually do.
Well, what was it that now, 20 years later, you went back and looked at it and said, that's really great, and when you saw our walls, you knew you were going to put it on?
I don't know, it's really great. I just,
wanted to see.
I always say, if you're looking for the little rabbit in my painting, don't do it.
It's there.
There's a big rabbit in that painting.
It's a little rabbit.
But I remember looking when William Burroughs was alive. I was in Kansas, and he used to shoot these pieces of wood with a shotgun, and then it would splinter in these fragments. But then he'd say, "Oh, you see that little figure in there?" And you see that. I mean, that was absolutely, you didn't know anything about painting.
So that painting is actually, I just realized, is an accidental figurative painting. You didn't set out to make a figurative painting.
When I started to see that form growing, I thought, okay, it looks like a chocolate rabbit. I think I'll just go with it. I'm going to throw it away anyway. And there's some dots on it. I dipped the tennis ball in the paint. I was throwing the tennis ball at the painting. It's a good way to get the paint on the canvas. But anyway, what I wanted to say, or just address the first thing, like a sort of long-winded answer, like a one answer for everything. It's hard to, you don't know what you're going to do as an artist. And if you're just illustrating what you already know, it's pretty boring. If you look at it like it's a privilege to be able to be involved in that practice, then I see paintings everywhere, all different kinds of paintings. And as you work, I'm 62 years old now, and so I guess I've been painting since I was a little kid, but certainly practicing for 40 years. And there are a lot of different kinds of paintings where you can pick this group of paintings or that group, like we saw the show. In fact, the show that was Larry's, paintings from 25 years ago. I never showed those paintings. In New York, some of those paintings have been shown other places. So, but they had been reproduced in different books and things like that. But trying to understand who you are, what your job is as an artist, or how these paintings define who you are. You have to make your own version of life. You have to make, as a person, you have to make your own version of art as an artist. And I wanted to break with the things that were happening around me that we're not speaking to.
This is in the 1970s.
70s, yeah. And then as appearances are, I don't think that there's a reason why your work has to have the same appearance just because the same artist is making that work.
It's interesting, Picabia was very deliberate on that. He constantly was changing his style, partly because he didn't want to be pegged under anyone's style, but also his style became a kind of commodity.
Well, there you go. Americans love signature. They love, if you didn't say Anselm Kiefer's work, you always get a work that looks like a Kiefer. Very successful. Whether you like it or you don't like it, it's just, more successful than Joseph Beuys, who was his teacher and a much more interesting artist. Harder to put into a box. But the Chinese calligraphers used to change their name mid-career so they could start over as somebody else. I like that idea. So, for example, I painted on a lot of different things, and a lot of different things. Well, forget that for a second. I just want to complete the thought. So, for example, a guy named James Nares didn't have any money, and he needed a studio. So I let him use my studio on 23rd Street years ago, and his way of repaying me was he was walking by the Gramercy gym where Mike Tyson trained, and the boxing ring from the gym was laying out on the floor with a couple of other cards, and he knew that I liked to paint on this kind of material. He gave me these things, just brought them to the studio one day. He could have given me a better gift. And people knew that I liked to work on found materials, and invariably people would give me this. I made a painting that was on a banner from Coney Island, a two-headed woman, and called a Batista. And this Japanese dealer said, would you like to paint on backdrops from the Kabuki Theater in Japan? I can get these backdrops for you, because he saw that painting. I said, absolutely. And he gave me about 14, gave me this material, and I ended up having that opportunity to be the Japanese or the Chinese calligrapher who could change his name mid-career and start over as somebody else. And these paintings had a totally different appearance than the tarp paintings that I was painting. Again, I was driving down the road in Tijuana, Mexico, and a guy's truck was broken down. And I looked next to his truck, and it looked like an elephant skin was on the floor, and it was this massive, beautiful lona. It was a green tarp, and it had lots of patches on it. Somebody's mother probably sewed their truck tarp. And it was 17 by 23 feet. I had $70 in my pocket. I said, this is all I have. Can I buy this from you? He said, okay. I made the first painting on the army material in a vivero, in a vegetable flower orchard in Tijuana. Tied this, cut down a bamboo tree, tied it together, put it between the two trees, and painted out there. Then I went to a truck stop and bought 2 more tarps from some other truck driver. And started to, my father was in the ropa and sala business, which is used clothes, and he knew a guy that was jobbing army material. So I got to make 24 stations of the cross with writing on. There was a book by William Gaddis called Recognitions. that I like very, very much, and I started to write words out of that book on. So the title of the painting was also the subject matter, and the way that it was painted had something to do with that. And these were done at the same time as the kabuki painting. So, you know, maybe I have a split personality. I mean, making movies and making paintings, very different kind of practices, but usually I throw the script away at a certain point. I don't rehearse. So whenever I'm making a movie, I just get all the people in where they know what they're supposed to do. Something happens. My attitude is we all jump in the hole. If we can crawl out, we go home. If we don't,
It's your fault.
and it's my fault. Anyway, so I just wanted to finish that because there's things that happen all of the time, and I see things all of the time, and so the work takes on different appearances because it's really the attitude of the artist that informs what it is, and the appearance could be, for example, the paintings in the show, like painting Albert Oler, the paintings that look kind of like 17th century paintings. I was at Giovanni Volpe's house, this man in Venice, and he had paintings of procurators that were his relatives in this palazzo on the Grand Canal. And I thought, you just need some line. But I couldn't really deface the guy's paintings in his house. So I went back to New York, and I started to make my own antique paintings that I could paint over. Sometimes I didn't feel like I needed to put a white mark, but instead of finding a found image, I made my own found object. And in fact, when I made Basquiat, I shot about 90,000 feet of film, which is very, very little. I don't know that anybody on the set knew what I was going to do with that material. I looked at it like a found object, made the best thing I could out of it. So I can make my own found objects, that's all I'm saying.
And that's, I think that's really important. I mean, having seen the exhibition at the Gaussian, where it was ostensibly abstract paintings on neutral backgrounds, tarps that had some stains, and seeing these, which are ostensibly figurative paintings, they're really the same thing. All, as you said, you made a found, you painted what would have been a found image and painted on top. The gestures, that white gesso marks that you've done, or the stains that you do on top of the same gesture, whether there's a figurative element behind it or an abstract or neutral. And I think that that's where it starts getting interesting for me, and whether people can really separate out for themselves when they're looking at painting, for instance, the kabuki backdrops. I mean, they're so beautiful. Well, one of the exciting things for me for this show.
The painting of Albert actually is actually Albert posed for me. That was painted in Spain. And actually, I'll sit this way and see what you're doing. But also, if we think about Willumsen painting on the frames and finding a way that is personal to him, in the 70s, 60s, 70s, strip framing, kind of Bauhaus kind of idea about framing these modernist works, that became something that also became a cliche or colloquialism or whatever. I mean, I found the 17th century Italian frame, cast it in fiberglass, and then thought, okay, why don't we have frames like this? I mean, it's always a way of saying, is this modern? Is this possible? In this way, can this be a painting? And then what happens as you're doing it is you get roped into the fact that I'm actually a painter. And, I painted that guy's shoes like that. I painted that guy's shoes like that. I mean, I actually do it with my own hands. Nobody else does it. I don't have a factory making my stuff, and the fact that you can, whether there's a figment or whether there's not a figment, you can see the way the paint is put down. If you know anything, or you're looking at painting, you see the way the marks are made, and that's super important to me. as a part of, you can't extract the image from the way that the thing is painted.
Right.
Let's see something else.
Well, the other exciting thing for me for this.
Well, let's go back to Vito. for a second.
Oh, okay.
So that painting was painted at Casa Frollo in Venice.
So the same one that had the,
It was painted in Venice, and Giovanni Volpe had this palazzo. So it's funny that Willumsen had all these paintings in Venice and of Venice, and Vito was 11 years old, but I actually painted that painting thinking about the way Picabia painted. I had a painting called Susie Soledor, and
by Picabia.
Picabia from 1933. Some people think it was made in 1926, but I think it was made in 1933. And also looked kind of more like a Picasso-type painting, painted from the 20th century. Instead of, say, the painting of Albert, I looked like in this Mona Io outfit. It's a finger painting also. So that sky and all that stuff is just painted and with my fingers, and then there's resin that's poured on while it's wet. Because even if it looks sort of perfect, it's nice to mess with it and let it melt.
It's a great painting, and Vito was here last night. The other one that was exciting, that wasn't in the exhibition in Denmark, one of the reasons I'm thrilled to have all this space, was we were able to have this painting of the little girl. We wanted just about the little girl and then the big girls that came afterwards.
Actually, I was having a show in Houston when I was with Nick Sirota, who's the director of that.
Okay.
We were driving around the north side of Houston, and I stopped at a bricolage place, a junk store, and they had all of these paintings, and I bought them. They're all on the show, actually. There's one of all of these found objects with purple paint on them, and one of them was of this little girl. So I just painted some purple on, framed it on her, and kept it in my house in Montauk, and 14 years later I thought, well, that could be a good model for a painting. So I took it in the backyard and made a finger painting of it. That's 13.5 by 12.5 feet. So that's all finger painting except for the collar and these these blue marks, purple marks, that are made with a palette knife.
Why the scale? Why the 13.5 feet? You took a little painting and now you made it enormous.
Well, I think that the physical reality of confronting something like that has a lot to do with what it means and how you feel. And for example, I mean, if you see Jeff Koons' show at the Whitney, whatever you think one way or the other, to see those little tchotchkes that are life-size. For example, the one of, what's the singer? Michael Jackson. You know, you see that, and it's very impressive. I mean, you see a little moon dog that's that big, you see it at another scale, you have to confront it in a different way. I mean, you see a Mark Rothko, when you go to Rothko Chapel, it's one thing, it's small and yet the technique could be the same. And, you know, then you could see a little painting, like a little Masaccio painting or a Vermeer painting, or, I mean, it doesn't have to be big to be good. But it was a lot of fun. The first one I painted wasn't 13 feet tall, it was 7.5 by 7. And I thought, you know, I'd like to see what happens when I make it bigger.
And they end up looking like icons. That's one of the reasons I was like, as soon as we knew we were doing the show, I knew this painting was going to hang up high in the location it's at, because I wanted to get the sense of the kind of icon.
But I realize I'm also an anti-iconic artist.
I know, but this is iconic. It is an actual icon rather than not an iconic work.
No, it's a weird thing, because, you know, I guess some people recognize what you do, but you don't want them to recognize what you do because you're doing the same damn thing all the time until it's boring.
Which brings me to the next work. Now, you did how many of the first of the
There were 14 that were made.
And that was in 1991?
No, 2001, 2002.
Okay, now this is more recent painting.
Yeah.
It looks like a big girl, but it's not. It's a completely different way of thinking and painting. It's a different gesture. It looks like, it's as if, those of you who know I'm a specialist in Mark Rothko, it's as if saying the same, he painted the same painting over and over again just because it looked like it had the snap crack angles. Each painting was completely different, even though it did have that iconic image. And I was thinking about that in relation to the more recent iterations of the girls.
Well, I think also, I mean, in the most literal sense, when I made the painting with the girl and the lines, I wanted to make a painting of that little painting. And not only that, it was right around the time that, when was September 11th?
2001.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Robert Rosenblum wrote about those pictures. I mean, it seemed like the jet stream that went over, it seemed like this purple was attacking that girl. Not intentional, but whatever, there was something about that seemed, that had an act of violence about it. This painting, I think, had more to do with the, how complicated can it be to relate to somebody else. I mean, my father once said to me, how can you cross the eyes out these paintings? First of all, they never had any eyes, but I said to him, you know, because I want you to look at her chin. I really do. And so they're finger paintings also, and it's just a way I wanted to see if I could actually do it. And I made a lot of works on maps, and there's a kind of plotting that goes on. And I think when these marks dissect this, you can't really look at it like this.
I got to look at it.
Because it doesn't look like anything. It's just an image of a painting. Let's not look at it anymore.
But there is something I wanted to find, something that I found out when I was looking at it, is in how, even though it might look like it's the big girl, really look at this painting and the way that the lines divide up the painting, and look at the different sections. And he does want you to look up close, not standing back. It separates out into different abstract paintings. When you look up close, there's no figure.
If you get up closer to her lips, if you go, it looks sort of like a Turner water bottle in red. I mean, there you can't. It looks like lips, but if you get up closer, it looks like that.
But it's simultaneously abstract and figurative at the same time. And
Well, it disassembles itself. I mean, when I made the first plate painting, I wanted to make something that was congealing as much as it was coming apart when you're looking at it. And
this is a more recent, it was not.
1993, it's not an abstract thing, it's painting my wife, my ex-wife, but we're still really good friends. But
it does break up. It's almost as if, fractals enlarging as much as you can.
well, if you look at the first plate paintings were 8 by 9 feet. When I made them 10 by 14 feet, the plates got smaller. So if you're kind of in a molecular way, I think since paintings are here, we don't need to look at this. But let's just keep going and see what else we've got. That might be going the wrong way. Oh, there we go.
What's
Okay. That's the guy I used to be. Keep going. Yeah, can't really see that in that image.
These are some of the recent shows.
Yeah, so if you look at that, let's go slow. It looks radically different than the show that's here. But does this represent me? Yeah. Does this represent me? Yeah.
Quick on the draw.
That's okay. But you walk into a space, you think about what you want to show. Hopefully, say you're a writer. You're writing poems. Each poem is different. Or say you're writing a novel. Novels are different. So it's the same author, but it's not the same book. And, right, I mean, if you read A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius by Dave Eggers, and then you read What is the What, you're glad that he made both works, but they're not the same book. And hopefully, somebody could go, oh yeah, I can, what constitutes a Schnabel? What would it have? Would it be something about surface? Would it be something about an image that's printed? Would it be something about whatever it is? And you could kind of, maybe you could make a, what do they call them? With the computer? No, now. Yeah, now. Okay, Schnabel app. Okay, you go to this different things and you can make your own painting like that. You can start to include whatever I would put in the painting, but you can't really do it. If you're not me.
How do you determine when it's a good painting?
When I like it. Like it.
Well, what is it that'll make you like it?
Well, then let's see what else you have so we can turn this off. Oh, I like that painting. Go back. That painting is painted on an awning from a butcher shop in the Atlas Mountains. I was driving through there with my wife and kids. The kids were really bored because I wanted to take the awning off of the butcher shop. It took about 10 guys to do this. But you see, the bottom of that painting is burnt by the sun. The part that's red was rolled up, and that's why it's still red. So the sun burnt that and made that landscape go through there. And I like that. I can use all the help I can get. Everybody can. The other painting is, it looks like wood, but actually there was a couch that I had and left it outside, and the veneer separated from the wood on the couch, and I photographed a little piece of the veneer and blew it up and made the shape that looked kind of like a headboard or a ironing board, but it looks like wood. But it's printed on polyester, and I painted some white on it. Most of those paintings that we're looking at are printed, whether that's printed by the sun or printed digitally, or that was a photograph that my friend Herbie, who's here, he took at Pipeline, the back door of somebody surfing, and we did it in black and white, and I just painted white on it and took the hose and kind of subtracted it as I was drawing on it. And the painting on the left is, when I made the diving bell and the butterfly, I found these x-rays in an abandoned building, and they look like paintings to me. So I used them for the credits, but I also glued them up on polyester and then took ink and made some marks on them. And when I liked the way the mark looked, I thought it was done. Actually, I showed some of those paintings without any paint on them for a while, and I thought maybe it was too conservative to put paint on. And then I didn't like them enough, so I put some ink on it and worked on them some more. But all of those have images that are printed anyway. So at one moment I thought I needed to build a wall, like in the 70s. I needed to build a wall, 1975. And that could be the receiver for whatever information I was introducing to the painting. Later I realized that something could be pictorial, could be an image, and that could be the architecture, and I could paint on top of that. Let's see what else is here. But I think this is really good. Probably some of the kids that were in the class, or some of the people were as old as I am in that class. I could kind of dissect my own work and criticize it, so I could explain to them why I don't like what they're doing or what a solution could be to what they were thinking about. For example, that. See, this is not a frame that's on there. That's a painting hanging on a wall. And that painting is 10 by 7 feet. There's no paint on it. What we have in this show here are these, I think they're Maxime Duchamp photographs from the 19th century Egypt. And I spray painted on glass, and then I put another piece of glass on it. So when you see the painting, you kind of look at it, and you can't really tell where the paint is. And even the color of the bottom of it becomes the color that the paper looks like when glass is in front of it. So you don't really know what you're looking at. And that idea of having to look at something and try to, and not being able to understand what you're looking at, or that something be a mystery, is something that I'm attracted to. if you make a movie and people don't understand it, they're not very happy. So people that like paintings usually are more interested in mystery.
It's interesting, a lot of people were asking me last night to explain the paintings in the show. And they are what they are.
They are what they're not.
And that's even more important, they are what they're not, actually. And it's a matter of, you're just like me, I don't know. I mean, I've never heard of Willumsen before. I've been working on your work most of my career. I worked on Duchamp, but not so much Picabia, but I do Picabia. And I really do feel he's key to pulling this all together. But I really think it's a matter of, I think people want it to have a specific correspondence of meaning, that they want things to be literal, that they want to have a narrative, and it doesn't, and even though all these paintings suggest it, it doesn't really exist.
I think that there's a unifying concept, it's independent. I think Picabia was an independent artist, I think that Willumsen was independent, and they were not coerced by isms and by groups, and when they had to leave a group or reject whatever, I love that saying that Woody Allen stole from Groucho Marx, when he says, I would never want to be a club of any club that got me as a member. And I think that Willumsen probably felt like that, and certainly Picabia felt like that. So if art is about freedom, then accept that. It might be lonely sometimes or whatever, but it's a great privilege to do it. Who cares what people think about it? I mean, really. Now we're sitting here, or Roberta Smith wrote a great review about my work, 30 years later saying that, people are painting now, it looks like work I made 30 years ago. Why didn't she write a grade that was 30 years ago? She needed to... It's okay, I say thank you, Roberta, now.
I'm telling you she likes your work, it just took her this long to write it.
But there's another thing that happens. There's a great line in Marlon Brando's film, One-Eyed Jacks, where he says to Carl Malden, his name is Dad Longworth in this movie, he says, Dad, in this time you're One-Eyed Jack, I've seen the other side. I've seen her other side, and I've seen the other side of a lot of people. I was explaining to my friend Tatiana the other day, there's a difference between the art world and the world of art. And hopefully we're living in the world of art, not in the art world.
Yes, say yes, that's what we're doing here. As long as you're under my watch, that's what we're doing, and that's why this is so important. And this particular show, and it might seem strange to you now, but the issues that this exhibition is raising are key. It's questions of judgment. Who gets to judge the work? I mean, that is very specifically what Picabia was interested in. And here we are dealing with an artist who is extolled as one of the first abstract painters. He and Duchamp have created, have worked together on Dada, this avant-garde art movement. And then he could have kept doing this work. I mean, he was famous for it, and he changes. But he and Duchamp are always questioning who gets to judge. In fact, Duchamp tested that by sending in a urinal that he signed Armand to a jury exhibition that said they would take anything, and it got rejected. And guess who was the head of that organization we think might have been in on it was our own William Blackens, who suggested that maybe Mr. Mutt and Mr. Duchamp would come and discuss why this work is art. So you can see that they were always questioning who gets to make these decisions. And this is really key to this exhibition. They also have their taste and style and aesthetics. Taste and style are habits. Aesthetics is that something separate and universal, and only certain art people can actually can be the receivers of it. So, this exhibition was really important for me to have, especially to have you as part of this exhibition. As I said, this is known for me, for my career, thinking about what art is, what's important, where is the envelope going, and who cares where the envelope's going. So this is, really important to have here at this time.
Well, I think I have to think about one thing also. I mean, if you look at Lake Picasso, they didn't include Lake Picasso paintings in the Museum on Art show in the 70s. If you think of Lake Magritte, Lake Curator,
Lake Picabia.
well, obviously he's here, so
But
that's,
before,
well, that's what I'm saying is artists, if they live long enough, will change their style, will want to experiment with other things. Lake Matisse, but it doesn't always work out where people will applaud your work when that happens. And even after Picasso was dead, and there was that show at the Grand Palais of Picasso and the different classical artists that he interpreted or made paintings that related to, what was his name? Michael Brenson wrote some idiotic review saying that it was amazing. And I remember Joseph Kassouf, after seeing the Picasso show at the Museum of Art, I saw him that night at this bar we were hanging around, and he told me, see, Picasso wasn't any good. So what I'm saying is, you can show people something. You can put somebody on the road, but you can't make them walk on it. And somebody will be as sure as they can be about, in the most concrete kind of way, that is total garbage. And somebody else can look at it and think that's the greatest thing they've ever seen. And that's okay.
This was such an incredible experience. The exhibition, during the talk, working up to the exhibition. Luckily, we will have part 2 of all this experience during our pause in Miami.
I hope everybody will go look at the show, because really it's more important.
Now that you have heard from Julian, go and see the show. Julian will also be signing books.
I
in the
will.
lobby. So it's another chance to talk to him.